My job is to tell you that the fire escape is still through there, the toilets are still downstairs, and I'm still Simon Olding, and I've got the great honour of being chair of the Leach Pottery Trust. We're going to run the panel in the same sort of way, but it first of all gives me enormous pleasure to introduce to you again our inspirational director at the Leach Pottery, Libby Buckley. Libby is going to present first, and then these gentlemen will make a presentation each, and as before, we'll open it up for questions. So we've got an exciting hour ahead on the Leach Pottery. Libby.
Thank you. I will stand up to match everybody else. At the beginning. So first of all, I think the most obvious thing for me to say is it is a massive privilege to be able to work at the Leach Pottery, and I've really enjoyed. I've been there over 18 months and nearly 2 years, so I'm not new anymore, and I should know all the answers to all the questions. I've still got a lot to learn, but it is an amazing place to be, and the main thing about it being an amazing place is all the wonderful people that work there, and that's staff, volunteers, trustees, tutors, people coming on residencies. There's always lots of interesting people coming and going, and I'm the least interesting person of all those people. But I think, you know, the thing that I always find is you go out and about, and people say to you, oh, where do you work? And you say Leach Pottery. And most of the time people go, oh wow, that was amazing, oh, you're so lucky. And then their next question is, oh, are you a potter? And I have to go, no, I just shuffle paper. So this is my opportunity to tell you about the shuffling of paper, which is probably less fascinating than what the potters are going to talk about. But it's really just to give you a sense of what the pottery is today, how it works, how it functions, and all that side of things. So, as we heard this morning, when the keys were handed over, this empty building with no money, it was a museum, and they had to work out how it was going to run. So, I think, you know, one of the questions that I had set myself was, what did they expect it to be, and, you know, have we achieved that? And I think we have more than achieved what they were hoping it would be, and it has changed massively over time. And the nice thing about it is it's continuing to evolve and to change. So where we are at the moment is we're seen as an interesting case study. People are always saying, oh, well, you're a really interesting case study because you don't get your money from public sector. So we generate 90% of our funding on site. And that, yeah, so in that way we are really interesting. And there are some real positives to that, but also the negatives. When I arrived, there was £3,500 in our savings, in our reserve account, which is a worry. You know, the turnover at the moment is about £470,000. Half of that is salaries, more than half of that is salaries. And so it's very much my responsibility to make sure that everything runs and stays on budget and on time, and things work in a way that everybody else gets to do all of the stuff that they need to do. So the public sector funding that we do get is that we get Arts Council funding. So we get £40,000 a year for the Arts Council, which is set for the next 4 years. And we're the smallest, we're the tiniest of the MPOs in the country. We did ask for more money, but they wouldn't give us any more. And then we also get support from Cornwall Council. And that, I think, in the future is an ever-shrinking pot of money. It's going to go down next year and will probably carry on going down. That goes towards sort of ongoing activity. On top of that, we try and fundraise, and I spend quite a lot of my time looking for funds for specific projects. It's hard to get revenue funding, but you know, we can try and sort of tick off lots of different funding for education and residencies and all sorts of other things. So as Tamsin was saying, this morning that they bought Beagle Cross and then handed the whole site over to us. So we have responsibility. So the good side is that we have a 100-year lease on both the old Pottery Cottage and Beagle Cross, which is great. But we have the maintenance of that, which is the downside of that. So we've just spent £25,000 fixing some rotting walls in Beagle Cross, which is something that we inherited as part of that gift, which is great. But it is, there are definite downsides to it. The way that it works is it's split sort of 4 ways between running a shop, generating income from the shop, from wholesaling, so what the studio's doing, running courses on site, and museum admissions. And then there's a few other little bits and pieces that we do, but those are really the 4 things that we do. And they are the core of what we're doing, and they generate the stability. So really, making sure that they all work really well and generate lots of income allows us to support other things, slightly more profitable things that we can do, and do community work, all of those sorts of things. I can get a bit of a picture. So again, these are our scheduled monuments that we need to look after. So in the future, we need to look at sort of conservation going forward. So although it was all conserved when it was handed over, these things don't stay stable forever. So all of that is things that we need to look at in the future. And this is kind of where we are today. We do lots of things. So I thought I'd tell you a bit about some of the things that we do. So we work with schools. This is an example of a mural project that Learning Participation Team did. But we also we get local children in. We work with community groups. We go out and work with people off-site. We have a really interesting group working with people with dementia and their carers. That's something that we'd like to develop and expand on. I think there's lots of other things that we can do along those lines. And in the future, we're hoping to set up after school clubs and baby clay. We haven't come up with a good word for it yet, but getting kids involved early on. And really, that's the sort of fundamental thing that runs through everything that we should be doing, is how to encourage the next generation and give people the opportunity to try things out. And it's something that Bernard talks about in his book, is giving people the opportunity to go, or children, to go and dig up clay and experiment and try things out and try the whole process from start to finish, which is something I'm really keen to try and do. So we get people coming from all over the world. These are some Japanese school children coming on a visit. Lots more excited children, which is kind of the nice thing. We have residencies, and I think the studio are probably going to talk more about that. The opportunity to get people in from around the world to share experiences and train and swap ideas and theories. These are a couple of residencies that we've had.
Could you name them?
Oh, sorry. That was Jeff Allstrike. That was Warren Mackenzie.
Yes.
Pat Burns. Thank you.
Yusuke Matsubachi.
Before my time. And that's Deborah Sloan, who was actually over a couple of weeks ago. She did another course making Awesome Rider roof tiles. So she's made, so there's quite a few around the country now, so every time she comes she makes something else. We also have lots of other visitors here. I'm not going to go through all these people because I don't know who they are. But we also have the museum, activities on site in the museum, exhibitions. We have a fantastic library, and we are sort of working towards increasing that. We've put it online, we've got the website, we're trying to increase resources on the website, and then that takes us back to the shop. And one of the things that we're trying to do is support potters. So we have about 65 potters that we represent and try and support. We're slowly putting those online, so we're selling more work online, and we'd like to expand who we take and try and sort of balance out the type of people, background, sort of support some up and coming potters. This is our current exhibition, and I'm not going to talk too much about what's going to happen in the future because I could go on for about an hour and a half about that. But as well as having this exhibition, we've also got in the Cube an exhibition celebrating the 10-year anniversary, and as part of that we've got some plans for the future, which we did with an architect called MJ Long. And so we've been looking at how we can develop the site. And that's a very long-term plan, that's 2021. But if you are interested, if you want to go up and have a look, I'm really interested in feedback. So it's how we can make best use of a very small contained site and try and make it as accessible as possible to the public. Because we've got these sort of two bits that weren't really connected together at the beginning. It's to try and open it up and have more community space and more flexible space, and to put in more of an introduction to the pottery, so people that don't have the knowledge going into the old pottery, they have a better understanding of what they're going to see. I think a lot of our visitors, as people were saying earlier on, have come a long way and sort of come on pilgrimage. And those people are fine because they know exactly what they're going to see. But what we'd like to encourage is to make people more comfortable and for them to understand more about what they're going to see. So that's all things that we're going to try and do in the long term, which will take lots of fundraising and lots of planning. Then the other thing that we've got in the future is 2020, which is the centenary of the pottery. And what we'd like to do for that is to try and put on exhibitions, but we have such a tiny space to do exhibitions that we're actually talking to lots of other museums about everybody putting on complementary exhibitions, and sort of having this whole thing going on, not just here but in Japan as well, and having residencies and exchanges, sending the school group over to Japan, hopefully doing a series of talks or seminars. There's all sorts of things that we'd like to do to sort of celebrate the centenary. And that's all I'm going to say about that. I'm now going to hand you over to the studio. So I'd like to introduce Roelof, who's our lead potter. Okay.
I'm going to mainly stay seated for this. So, yes, as Libby said, my official job title is lead potter. It was called senior production potter at first. This is about 5 years, well, almost 5 years ago when I first started working up there. So after Jack left, they were looking for somebody to run the workshop, and they invited applications. At that time, I was working in the jail yard studios, which I think they're all over there. As well as my partner Melanie, who had a shop in town where I used to sell my work from, and I worked at the jail yard. So for about 15 years, I worked there, and when this opportunity came up, when it was advertised, I thought, well, I'm going to apply. Just, I wasn't quite sure what the job would entail. I thought, well, basically running a studio. So I've run my own studio for many years, but it was just myself. So I was quite apprehensive about going up there, knowing and anticipating that it would be a very public kind of position. Unlike what I was having, I was very, very sheltered where I worked. Melanie mainly dealt with the public across the road, so where I felt very contained, safe, and so that was one of the main things that I had some doubt in my mind about going up there, because I never really done anything like that before. My application was successful, and going into the studio, which was already functioning. So obviously, some of you were here earlier with when Jack was here explaining how they started it. So in a way, it was quite easy for me to go in there because all these problems that he had to deal with had already been solved. There were kilns, there was equipment, they were making a range of wear. So, you know, I basically, the idea was I would just come in and manage that. It was also felt that at the time when I started there is to not change the standard wear range at first, obviously because the pottery was already getting a revenue from that, and it would be dangerous to just stop everything and start making something new. So for about the first year, we continued making the range that Jack had designed. Alongside that, we slowly started making sort of new pots. But we were still using the soda ware technique, so the soda firing. And then about September of that first year, to 2013, I started. Warren Mackenzie, there's a picture of. Oh, I'm supposed to press this. Oh no! I think we all saw Warren. So there's the crew there. Some of us are not. Mine is a couple. They are working or they're abroad. The cats currently in Minnesota, where Warren is from. So when Warren arrived, that was a very important part and a very important event in my career. I've heard of Warren many years, and I was quite excited that he came back to the pottery where he had first worked. Almost 50 years. I think it was 50 years since he'd last been there. He did a residency, and within 2 weeks he was producing pots. And I don't know if Warren is 94 now, and at the time he came, he was 90, and I'd assigned somebody from the workshop, a volunteer, to be his assistant, and they were very disappointed because Warren said, "Oh no, that's fine, I can do it, I can carry my clay," and he did. Just watching him work, he was working downstairs in the old pottery on the kick wheel, also interacting with the public, and just seeing these forms sort of, he uses very soft clay, being his hands being very sort of so the first problem we had was getting the clay right for him, and it was just we made some clay, so can I have that softer, and we made it softer again, sort of add more slops to it, and then about 8 times we had to do it till it was almost like the consistency of don't want to be rude, but sort of dog poop. And then just watching him form these shapes, they were just sort of happening. And Warren just made in a short time. He was only there for 2 weeks, and he made a body. He probably made about 200 odd pots while he was there, and he brought with him recipes of his glazes, as well as glazes that have been used at the Leach Pottery in the past. And this was different to the soda firing process, where you have to apply a glaze and then fire the pots. And we fire under in a reducing atmosphere. So that was my first really big challenge, is to kind of get this stuff through in this short time. There was an exhibition at the end of the sort of public events and workshops, and it was sort of that at that time when we started thinking about, right, what is the studio going to become now? How are we going to work from, taking from what Jack had started to going to a different place. I mean, another thing that was obviously what I felt was I didn't want to indefinitely continue making someone else's pots. I think all artists, it's not really a place you want to be, sort of making work someone else had designed. And then, so anyway, after sort of rushed through all these pots, it was very, almost no chance, there's no time for testing anything, so it was a very anxious time for me, and luckily it worked in the end, and the pots came out, and we had the exhibition. And then later in that year we started to our previous director, Julia, had a friendship with the owner of Sea Salt, who's, you all know the clothing company, the Cornish clothing company. And they offered to sponsor an apprenticeship, which was great for us because, some of our apprentices, well, Ian's a volunteer, Annabelle is our third apprentice, and she's over there. And so Callum, what brings me on to Callum, he was the first apprentice to start officially. So the idea is he would the apprentices would work at the pottery for 2 years, and then it was later decided that 3 years is better for them to get a better grounding. And then it was at this time that Sea Salt also wanted to have a range that we'd made for them. And so that really, with their sort of backing, that really kicked off, or allowed us the sort of grace period to change the work from what Jack had designed and to move over to, in a sort of financially secure situation, to producing our own range of work. And so that's kind of where we are now. And I kind of want to, I know this is sort of, we don't have a lot of time, so I'd like to sort of hand over to Callum and maybe you can talk about his experience.
Okay. Yeah. So as Roelof was saying, I was the first apprentice on the sort of Sea Salt bursary, and that's different to the volunteer programme in the way that it's for people who have little or no experience in ceramics, to train from scratch basically. So previous to doing this, I'd studied furniture making, and I'm from St Ives, and as I was coming to the end of my course was when the apprenticeship came up. And I'd done an evening class before, but I had very little experience. But I knew that I just loved making items for people to use on a sort of daily basis. So it's almost interactive art in a sense, where people using the items as part of it. And so I started in 2014. It was, and it's been eventful since then, and it's been really, my experience has been absolutely great. And obviously I finished my apprenticeship last year, and I'm still working there at the minute, and hopefully for a few years to come. And yeah, I mean, like, just the way of learning there is, I found, has been so great, because not only in the studio you have the team that was already there of Roelof, Kat and Britta, who are already sort of established potters in their own right, from very different, they're all from all around the world, all different training, everything like that, so I had their input in my sort of education, but then also from the different volunteers that we've had, again from all around the world, all different backgrounds, so you're just getting all these different people giving you tips and advice, and the late nights just in there making pots and discussing what you're doing. And I think that's a big part of it, is having people around to question what you're making, because it makes you think about what you're doing. You're not just making pots by yourself somewhere with no one to ask you what are you doing, what are you trying to achieve, and seeing other people's work. Alongside that, obviously in the shop we've got so many different potters, and then the exhibitions, the residencies. So to be in one small place but have all these influences and everything, I feel it's been great for me in my development. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I'd like to say sort of briefly about our standard beer range that we're making. So when we're, obviously it's when you sort of approach it like, let's design or redesign the standard where we'll make a new range. So I felt it very important because with Callum, apprentices coming in, people with very little experience, to make something that would be very easy to make, very easy to train people on how to make it, and it was felt that although Jack's range was very beautiful, it was quite complicated, and it would be very difficult for somebody in a short period of time, maybe at that stage it was 2 years, to kind of get up to the level to make work like that. And so this very simple range that was the kind of basis for it, and also using a lot of the glazes that were used in the past. And I think, and this is 5 years, so that, or 4 years ago. And it's only now that we kind of reach, as a workshop, that we're kind of reaching a stage where we can become a bit more ambitious as to what we make and how we're taking it forward. I mean, another thing is that I don't want to do is to continue just making the same things indefinitely. There's definitely, I feel that we're at the moment we're moving to, to designing a new range. I mean, we won't replace the range immediately, but as the skill set in the workshop has got better, and the way in how we work. So I mean, I think maybe Matt can sort of maybe just talk about his experience as to how we work in the workshop. But I'd just like to introduce him. He's our second apprentice, and he's in his 3rd year now. So he's
coming to the end of that long journey. I think even looking at the work now, I think just in the short period of time, almost 3 years I've been there, the work's constantly evolving. I think the way we work in the studio is very much, as John was saying this morning, everyone teaching each other and learning from each other, and that helps with that evolution. It speeds it up because you don't have to find out all the problems on your own. You've got several people hitting several difficult points at any given time, and it's helped, I think, with the evolution of not just the standard wear but our personal work. And I think that experience through learning just helps you progress in a way that you'd never be able to in an education environment or sort of on your own setting up a studio. You've got we do sort of minimum 40 hours a week making pots, hundreds and hundreds of pots, so that repetition, that way of working, and like Callum said, if you can't figure out one way someone's showing you, there's always someone else who does it slightly differently. So I think a lot of us now, or a lot of the apprentices in many ways, are sort of a collection of the teachings of everyone that's in the studio. And I think you can see a lot of that in our work, the way we throw, the ease with which we throw, because of the way the range is designed and the way that Roelof designed the range. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think we work very well as a team. I think there's 8 of us at the minute, and we're all involved in all aspects of the making. So someone doesn't just make mugs and then take them all the way through. So someone could be making mugs, another person's going to handle them, someone else will glaze them, another person will fire them. So it's our work. It's not individuals working in a place together. We are working as a team, as a pottery. And then also what's important is all our individual work on top of that is it crosses over, we take influence from the range, and the range then can adjust slightly to different things that we're trying ourselves, and in the time I've been there, it's as when I started, Roelof had been there like a year or so he was still very much finding his feet and trying to perfect the range, I suppose, and we've cut out a lot of different steps, and we do things slightly differently and make it much more efficient, and I feel we're working in a much more efficient way, and we're still progressing and still changing, and there's lots we can change and lots of ways to develop, but I think we're going in a very good way, I feel, and I'm quite excited about what's coming, hopefully.
I think one of the things there's quite a few people from the studio in here, and one of the things that what we feel the studio place to be about is a safe place for people to experiment and to try things, and I think we're very conscious. No, I don't think there's anybody that is afraid to try something new in case somebody's going to be.
What are you doing there?
What kind of dog's that? I think we're all very supportive supportive of each other, and you know, I think any studio, any kind of creative venture, it should be a safe space, even for the bad ideas, you know, because
Something always comes from bad
yeah.
ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
Eventually, they answer questions.
So, Roelof, you were talking about the possibility of the standard web being refined or incrementally changed. How does that process take place? Is that debate between you all, or?
I think it's important to always. I mean, you know, we don't have ideologies as such, or you know, we have some. I think sort of design principles, and sort of our main one is you know, it should be, if the work is easy to make, that would translate in its use. People would enjoy it, you know, and I think that's our goal with what we're trying to do, is to. I mean, I don't know if that always works. I mean, I would be the first to raise my hand, so that, you know, we've made some bad pots, and, you know, some bad mistakes. But you know, I think that's another thing that's well, I was going to say unique about the Leach, but you know, I think it's always been a place of learning. You know, through its history, you know, you read about the terrible firings they had in the early days, and you know, it's kind of, and when you work in that, you know, we experience it. We have good days, and some days we open the kilns, and it's, you just want to sort of throw it all in the stick, although we're not allowed to now. You do occasionally see a teapot flying across the side wall. You know.
Yeah, I think we just want to make like quite nice, simple, honest pots that we enjoy working together, we enjoy making them, and hopefully then that goes across to the people buying them, and hopefully they can enjoy them. And I feel like that's what we're trying to do, at least. You know, it's not for me to say if we are or not, but I feel like that's at least what we're trying to do. And I know that I enjoy working there, and I haven't had a day where I didn't actually want to go to work, which is nice for a change from I've had a lot of rubbish jobs before, so so this is, I enjoy what we do, and I enjoy the people that we're with and where we're going.
Yeah, I think that everyone's passionate and really involved, not just as a job. It's not just a job. Everyone really wants this to succeed and wants it to be the best it can be, but I think,
I'm guessing it also might have been a bit risky at that moment where there was the engagement, and a really important engagement with Sea Salt, because that, you know, that was two different companies coming together and admittedly sharing a lot of interests and concerns, but you know, that must have been a risky moment, do you think?
definitely has its problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's always when you know, when a small organisation like us are dealing with a
Ever-growing
corporate organisation. I think Neil, because you know, the owner, one of the owners, as always, because he understood that, you know, he grew up with the Leach Pottery, and he has a real passion for it, and I think so. He's always, you know, he's aware of that relationships and how we, you know. So I think, although, you know, they're a massive organisation, I think, you know, I think so far we've managed it well, and hopefully we'll continue to. Although, I mean, they're only a small, you know, now the studio has grown to a point where, well, for one, the shop is the largest customer of the studio, which, well, I might have to speak under correction, I think it is, and so. And then we have other retailers around Britain that we supply with too, as well as I think we're one of the few potteries that export pots to Japan. And also I think recently we're making contacts with potteries in America, the Northern Clay Centre in Minnesota, which I think we're going to be showing our work in. So I think Sea Salt was very important for us at that. I mean, it was kind of fortunate as well, because it did I think it did speed things up quite a bit in us changing the studio into a sort of more professional entity where people actually paid for their labour. Whereas before there was kind of like, as Jack was explaining, there was no funding whatsoever, and especially when you're training people, it's not that productive at first. You're putting a lot of time into training, and there's not much coming out, and so that really allowed us to move very quickly forward into making the workshop in what it is today.
I mean, that's interesting in relation to Libby, that there's a refocus of what the Leach Pottery is going to do, which seems to me is really centred on this idea of, the legacy of training for future generations. So, I mean, it'd be interesting to hear you talk about that as the next step forward for pottery.
Yeah, I think it's connected to a lot of things that are happening. As everybody knows, all of the universities are closing their courses.
Not mine.
And it's becoming harder and harder for people to access art and craft and just materials and just the opportunity to have a go. And like we were chatting and Lawrence, John has been filming people, and Lawrence yesterday was talking about how he remembers making his first pot at 7 and he's still got it, and he's got this sort of love and connection to this thing that he did when he was a kid, and you don't know, that might have changed his life, and for us to have that impact on just one kid would be brilliant, and so for us to be able to offer lots of people lots of different things, whether it's just having a go for an hour or just coming into the museum and just playing for 5 minutes because they think no one's looking, and it's all out on the table and it's fine, right through to training where they come for a week, or they're coming for advanced skills, and that's something that we're looking at developing in the future, is more advanced courses for people that want to take that next step, through to the apprenticeship scheme, where the idea is that someone can come with no background at all and become a potter. And I think there are just so few places where you can do that. Another thing that we haven't talked about is volunteer placements. So we offer at the moment someone to come for 12 months, and it's because we've been given Beagle Cross and we've got accommodation, we can provide them with accommodation and a very tiny pocket money to keep them afloat. And so the idea is that somebody who doesn't have the privilege can come and get that experience, which they wouldn't get unless their parents can give them a pottery at the end of the garden or something. It's giving people a chance, really. So I think the more that we can do to get out and spread the word, and it might not be us doing it all, but just to try and do a bit more advocating and encouraging schools and giving them the confidence to use a kiln that they might have that they don't feel like they can use, and all that sort of thing is really the core of what we should be doing, I think.
The problem I think now is there's nowhere to go from, or we're limited on where people can go from here, because the studio's full now. So we can't really train another apprentice until people start to leave. But there's the Joe studios, but they limit, they don't come up that often, and you're limited. And so then we now need to start looking at where people can progress from here, because the sort of, in my opinion anyway, a big part of the legacy of the Leach is the potters that were made there, and they've gone off and they've spread from there. And so that's what we need to now look at doing to continue a legacy, is to allow people to move on, so that you can keep training in the studio, but then if we can help find a new place for people to go, then we can keep doing this, and then hopefully then that will be the legacy of now.
And I think part of that, when we were looking at how we could develop the site in the future, one of the things that came up was that, and whether we can create a little starter space, which is a sort of, you were talking about it being safe, and it's a safe space for people. The next step is to let them start setting up on their own, but they've still got the security of being at the Leach, and they'll have access to people and kilns, and then eventually, maybe that's a halfway house before people finally move on.
I think that whole again, we might have touched on it earlier today about the people that has come through the Leach Pottery. And I think that's, for me, that was sort of affirmed when I went to Minnesota last year. I was doing there's a Croy Valley River. There's a group of potters there who was Jeff Ostrick, I think there was a picture of him earlier, and Warren. So Warren, after Warren left the Leach, he went back to Minnesota and taught at the university there for after a half. And he had a studio, and a lot of Americans went to Minnesota to were taught by Warren, and this is all part of this sort of family tree of Leach potters, and going back there and seeing what a strong influence, this small place in St Ives, how it spread throughout the world, and how important it was to so many people. And this again it's an interesting thing about the Leach Pottery, because it's something that I think everybody that's involved with it feels a kind of ownership to it. Sometimes, annoyingly so. The first few months I was there, I was constantly being told by people what I should do and things like that. But and that's, I feel, and the people who work, the other people who work at the Leach Pottery, which I think don't often get the credit, because it's so focused on the studio. Often, obviously our director to make sure that things go smoothly. Mark, who's over there, sales manager, very important. And Beth, volunteers. I'm not missing anyone. One of Matthew Tyers. Again, it's such an amazing place to work, and I think, and everybody that works there, the work they do is very important.
I think it's one of the things people don't understand, the sort of complicated relationships between the studio and education and exhibitions, and the sort of cross support of trying, the studio supports education supports exhibitions, and it's all very complicated when you actually, if you were to list out all the sort of different things that are going on and how, but each one of those bits is really important, and it wouldn't really work without that support from everybody helping everybody else.
It comes across too, I think the atmosphere comes across in the way that you're making, like you were saying earlier. And in the atmosphere of the place when you're there, you're not just visiting a museum, you feel the atmosphere of it now, you feel it living, and you feel harmonious and happy in the place. I've felt increasingly over the years that has grown. It's a good place to be in, and you see people looking happy go around and looking like they belong to it. But I think that's because you guys get on so well together and work so well together. It's so successful what you're doing. It's a very complicated procedure, but it's really working. It's wonderful.
It's because we're all heading in the same direction. I think we're all aiming for the same thing. And
it's not always easy.
Well, it's like any relationship has its ups and downs.
It is interesting that the studio. You saw the pictures of it earlier. For those of you here, it was sort of like empty space. So if you went back there now, it's really like working in a submarine. It's very, it's very compact. There's not a lot of space, not a lot of personal space, and some of Callum's spots. And so that is, and we do spend a lot of time in there. It's anybody who's a maker or work. There's no, for a lot of where the pottery is, although most of us are contracted to work 9 to 5, it often ends up, it's that extra 2 hours at the end of the day loading the kiln that will make the difference in getting the work out, so it could be sent off to deliver the orders on time.
And how do you think, as makers, your work has changed as a consequence of having to produce the sort of regular, routine, standard wear? How do you think about your own independent
I think it
practice?
does change your approach, doesn't it? I think we've actually discussed that quite a lot, and especially recently, just that approach of weighing up clay and working to a measurement, a dimension.
Yeah.
It sort of, I wouldn't say pushes you away from it, but you sort of move to a freer way of working. Like recently we've been doing a lot of throwing off the hump, which is just throwing lots of little things off one big lump of clay, and it allows you that freedom to just let the pots evolve on the wheel, which is it has a fluidity that we're sort of trying to capture all the time, and isn't always easy when you're working to although we do, like, all the pots have an individuality, even though they are, you know, the same size, the same dimensions, same glazes. There's always, you know, personality.
That's the kind of discipline I think is very crucial to learning the basics of a craft. You know, so we were
It's a
talking
solid foundation.
Yes, and so when we start doing our own work, I mean, there's another thing I'd like to say is how it influences your own work. Because there's 8 of us in there, we're alongside, obviously, we're making our standard. We're firing the kilns. Sometimes, you know, all 3 kilns go in a week, but very regular. I don't know, sort of roughly 12 or so firings a month. So the turnaround of getting the feedback from what you do is very quick.
Yeah.
And that's an advantage that you have in a studio environment like that. So if you're somebody working on your own, you might get you have to, I mean, those of you who don't know anything about ceramics, the process, so the kilns are generally they're quite big, and you have to have a lot of work in it to fire it. You know, firing empty kilns is not fuel efficient, and also it kind of doesn't really work. The results are always mixed if it's an empty kiln. And so, you know, because we're constantly working through a cycle, you can test things very quickly. So you can, you can literally sort of make a pot, and by the end of that week, that's going through the cycle. So on Monday you'll have it, and something like that, or so that's, I mean, that's one of the things that I learned from working there, is how quickly my work advances and changes. So, you know, because you have the luxury of getting that feedback so quickly, and I think that's pretty true for everybody.
Absolutely.
You know, and again, that I think time will tell. You know, this is still early days for the studio. I think time will tell, and I think that, you know, that speeded up learning process will definitely help the development of individual potters. And
I think as well the way that we because you're learning to make something to a specific size, to a specific shape of someone else's mind, it teaches you to be able to use the clay as you want to. You're learning to make someone else's shape, so you're learning to manipulate the clay and put it where you want it, where it needs to be. So then when you take that into your own practice, you're able to then create from your mind without too much difficulty. It won't always turn out exactly as you want, but that process is sped up because you've got this control of the clay that's learned through repetition and hundreds of pots from someone else's mind. I think that's right. So.
There's one of the this is just all I don't know really about the interesting things that I learned. I only realised, I've never taught people, well, in a limited way early in my career, but never taught people how to make pots, and so I only realised this after sort of being in a few years, getting people to do the shapes, and I then realised that why they're struggling is because, or sometimes struggling is because when I make them, I don't sit down and I don't decide what size they have to be. I just make them, and then afterwards I would measure them, check the thickness and all of that. So because I'm making them or I'm designing them, it comes from a different point, and they're having to follow that design.
Yeah.
I think things started speeding up once I realised that that's, I remember having a conversation with quite frustrated with people not being able to get the shape, and measuring very carefully. Almost let's say, well, I made this and I didn't design. I didn't say, well, these have to be 11.5 centimeters. I just made the thing for us. Therefore, they should trust that, and just make the thing. They don't have, once they get that sort of the movements right, so that the weight of the clay is right, and that should just kind of follow. And that was an interesting discovery, is how to teach people to make those shapes. A lot easier to just. So we developed ways of doing that, where people would start with the weight of clay just as fast as they could, making cylinders, and then and not worrying about measuring anything at that stage, and then sort of slowly move from that to actually starting to make the shape in as few movements as possible. And I feel, I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, no, I think what you're saying, for example, the dinner plate that we make, or any of the plates in fact, because he just designed it from a weight of clay, and we were struggling to get that size every time, or that shape right, and I think it must have been that moment when you triggered it, but he showed me, as long as I flatten it out and get the base the right thickness, I don't have to worry about anything else, the rest of it will just come right. As soon as I start throwing at the walls, roll the rim, flatten it down, it's just right every time, because I've got that foundation, that fundamental piece. Is how the work's evolved. And
So do you work with measuring sticks?
I don't with the plates anymore now.
Yeah.
And they're better plates now. But I think as well, when you're working and you're making and you're very conscious of trying to achieve something, you're so conscious of that thing you're trying to do, you're missing what you should be doing, which is just making it. And that's when the good pots come. I think that not consciously trying.
Do you have a day or a time of the day where you can try out these ideas in your schedule, in your week there working with pottery, or when do you get a chance to
on our personal work
do that?
Yeah, it's just any time after hours.
After
Yeah, so
hours.
if you wander up there. I mean, there's often a few of us in there of an evening.
So you've got access to the pottery.
Yeah, that's part of it, is that we all can use the pottery in our own time to produce our own work.
So that can be up to midnight.
And
it can be till the sun comes back up and you start work again.
It's so tough.
Yeah. I think there's people.
Sometimes.
But I think that some people think we never close.
Yeah.
Can I also ask that since Pottery Trudgeon has been quite, I'm looking for a second-hand wheel and it's very hard to find myself, apart from you. But do you think there'll come a time when maybe there are too many potters and the worry about selling your work to make a living is something that's on a lot of potters' minds as well?
I think if you make pots of the right quality, you shouldn't really worry about other people too much. Just make, as long as you're making your work true to yourself and making good quality pots, then they'll sell. Because there's going to be a lot of people with things like the throwdown stuff who think they can just buy a wheel and then just do it, and that isn't the case, and then they'll be the ones that will be worrying about whether they sell them or not, I think.
I mean, I suppose it's also the customer, and if people are going to buy a handmade mug rather than an IKEA mug, you just hope that those people are still and will always be around.
I think once you've bought a handmade mug and you've used it every day, you're buggered then, because you build relationships with these things. With the makers, it's hard to go back to something that's got no soul. Once you've got something that it's like a painting. You have that in your house and you sit and you look at it and you notice new things about it every day. And that's the attachment.
But the difference in price of buying one to the other and what people can afford these days.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
I know. Well, I mean, it's a valid point, and I think that's one of the things that I think if you're going to ask why is the Leach for, one of the things would be to make people look at the handmade. Like they would look at a print or a painting, or a sculpture, and I think that's our biggest challenge is because our standard wear mug retails for about £25, which is a kind of hefty amount for a mug, which you could go into Asda and inhale their lovely thing, and 99p. I don't know what they charge. I never look at mugs in a mass-produced mug, and so that is our challenge. Is to I think that's a very important thing. Where again, with the whole organisation is, should be focused is to communicate that the value in having something that's made by somebody else in it. I mean, you can ask what is art for. We don't really need it, but I think it nourishes the human soul.
Yeah, I'm just looking at those pots there. The finger marks. Showing people that this is a handmade product.
But it's,
they're very there.
He's got some fingers on him, hasn't he?
Whose are those?
Can you not tell?
Probably his toes.
They ain't much different.
I have a question. Been to all the 3 talks now, and what's very interesting is reflecting back on the 3, if you like, particularly with Jack, the 2 first apprentices, who were really talking a lot about the philosophy, if you like, or the spirit of Bernard Leach that had come through, although they moved on and it was very clear. But they were still affected by Bernard Leach, as had all the founders and the people who got very much involved in saving the pottery. So I suppose my question is, does that feeling of Bernard Leach still influence you and what you do?
There's a little bit of Bernard in all of it.
So where is that different?
I think what he was trying to promote in terms of handicrafts and he's following on from the arts and crafts movement sort of thing, trying to appreciate items that you use on a daily basis that are made by hand, or as you say, hand, heart and mind or whatever. And I think we do. I think we're trying to continue in, at least in certain aspects, in that way. But we're obviously in a very different world as 100 years later. And I think we're trying to do our own thing, but with that same sort of philosophy and a sense of that we're just trying to enjoy what we do and trying to make nice pots and hopefully continue doing that. And I think that's sort of what he was trying to achieve with it, and I think we're trying to do something very similar, but I don't feel a weight of it or anything like that as such. But
that was obvious for from the first 2 apprentices.
Yeah,
they felt the spirit, and they obviously were very deeply involved in discussing
I think
philosophy.
it's easy to get caught up in that philosophy, but as long as you have that as a foundation, I think we've all read The Unknown Craftsman, and we all like the idea of making without ego and not trying to represent life, but I think it's important to focus on developing pots, enjoying pots and making things that people enjoy using, as opposed to focusing too heavily on the philosophical side of pots. I think your work can suffer and you can get a bit lost in what you're doing if you focus too much on those things. They've laid that down, and we can reference that and use it to inform our work, but I don't think it should dictate the way we work.
Perhaps one should say it's the spirit of Bernard Leach.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's often what something deeply annoys me is when people start the sort of revisionist thing about Bernard and going back, and then there's a sort of fashion to nowadays kind of I'm not going to name names, sort of criticise Bernard for you hear various opinions, and always the arrogance of that always amazes me, that people come out with things like that, especially well-educated people, because that was of the time, and at the time what he was doing was quite radical. I mean, Simon gave us the 3 R's. We had a workshop just after Libby started, we was discussing about where the Leach is going. And in the group we were with Simon, did you remember the 3 R's?
Well, it wasn't reading, writing and written.
No.
So,
radical, rebellious and romantic.
and we try to live by that every day.
We talk about that at least once a week.
I think if you can tick 2 of the 3, then that's permission to do it.
Okay, well look, our hour is coming to a close. I'd like to give the final word to Libby, if I may, just to give us a sense of what's going to happen in 2020.
Yeah, I could tell you lots of things. I think it's trying to make sure that we do the pottery justice, really, and it's such a broad. If you were to include everything, you could go on for years celebrating, couldn't you? But I think what we're trying to do is in the small space that we've got, we're looking at exhibitions. I think one of the interesting things that we've recently acquired is the original manuscripts to the Potter's Book, and so one of the exhibitions that we're going to do is trying to tease that out and look at it, and we've got all the original drawings that Bernard made for the book, and then we've got the sort of first transcripts with all the little comments about it, and just use that as a basis, because it's also, I think, going to be the 80th anniversary of the publication of the Potter's Book. So that's one of the things that we're going to look at. And to try and tie up with other museums, and to try and use it as a way of spurring people on to have a go, really. Focusing it a lot around the community as well, to try. I'm conscious that I don't think as many people locally come and see us and get involved as I'd like. So some of it is around, what can we do to try and get more people involved.
Well, that sounds a good place to wish the Leach Pottery happy 10th birthday. To thank Libby, Callum, Matthew and Roelof for their contribution to the panel. Thank you all for your contributions throughout the day, and good afternoon.